You're listening to an Ono Media podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Into the Dark podcast. I am your host, Payton Moreland, and I'm so glad you are here joining me on my haunted, spooky, true crime podcast. If you are watching on YouTube and can give this video a thumbs up and also leave a comment, turn on notifications so you're notified when I upload, that would be great. And if you are listening on podcast and can leave me a review and also turn on automatic downloads, that would also be great. It's just a good way to support the show. If not, honestly, you can just listen, okay? You can just listen. But before we get into my 10 seconds, I have a major thank you that I need to give all of you. And that is because you literally sold out our first Into the Dark merch drop so fast. So fast. I know now that next time I need to order a lot more. I did not expect that many people would want the merch. So thank you so much. I know if you got it, you're going to love it. It is so freaking cute. And we are going to do another merch drop as soon as possible for those that weren't able to get it. But thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of the Into the Dark Club. I literally love you guys so much, and I appreciate all of the support. Okay, so for my 10 seconds today, I actually wanted to talk about the fact that on Tuesday mornings at 8 a.m. PT, I actually stream on Twitch, and I do a get ready with me. I hang out with the chat. Sometimes Garrett pops in, sometimes he's there, sometimes he's not, but usually I'm just putting my makeup on. A lot of people who watch also put their makeup on or just tune in while they're at work, and we kind of hang out and have fun. They tend to be a little bit longer. We listen to music. It's literally so fun. So it's kind of like my Into the Dark Twitch stream in a way. And so I'm inviting all of you to come join the stream. If you haven't used Twitch before, you can just go to the link in our episode notes or in our Instagram bio. It will set you up. You just set up an account. It's free. And then it's basically just a live stream and we all get to chat together, and it is so fun. It is quickly becoming one of my favorite days. So yeah, come hang out with me on Tuesday mornings on the Twitch live stream. But other than that, I think we should get into today's episode because this one is not a true crime case. I know we did true crime last time, and this time we are getting into something a little bit more green. We're talking about aliens. Okay, so if you ask most people whether they believe in aliens, you will get a variety of answers. Some people are all in on UFOs. They don't just think the truth is out there. They believe the proof is out there too. Others are more skeptical and they'll doubt every single account that they hear. And many people are somewhere in the middle. I would say that's kind of where I lie. I think that anything is possible, but sometimes I'm also a little skeptical. So it kind of just depends case to case for me. A lot of people don't think we're alone in the universe, but they're also hesitant to accept some of the narratives that are out there. And today I am talking about 3 specific encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena, otherwise known as UAPs. That is the modern day term for UFOs, and government officials adopted it specifically so it wouldn't sound so much like a tinfoil tale, which makes me feel like even more that it's real, because if they had to get rid of UFOs because that term was becoming too believable, okay, I'm just gonna call it UFO, okay? And speaking of the government, they've confirmed that all 3 of these encounters are real and authentic. So the UFO encounters we are talking about today, the government has said, yes, those are real. And I mean the real live government. And that is why we're going to be talking about them. And the government has actually released the video evidence to back this up.
A whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
But that is not how these clips actually reached the public originally. See, the internet is full of forums, social media pages, and other websites all about UFOs. People who believe in aliens can get together and talk about sightings and news or even swap videos. But these online communities, as we know, also have issues with trolls. I mean, doesn't every online community? So there are people who don't take UFOs seriously, and they show up to spread misinformation or to make fun of the regulars or to just lie, say, yeah, I saw one, and they didn't. So to all appearances, that's exactly what happened back on February 3rd, 2007. So someone with the username The Final Theory showed up on a message board called Above Top Secret. I mean, and this is the 2000s. This is when message boards were pretty popular. And this person, The Final Theory, told a story that just did not sound believable. They claimed that they were in the Navy, and back in 2005, so 2 years earlier, they were stationed on an aircraft carrier. And they didn't specify what their rank or their specific job duties were, but they did say they had something to do with computers. So one day, while The Final Theory was reviewing different records, they claim that they found evidence of a UFO encounter that had happened months earlier. Now, this incident had even been caught on camera, and The Final Theory claimed that they themselves watched the footage. And it showed a pilot chasing and interacting with a flying saucer. That's what this footage showed. Now, the pilot tried to get his instruments to focus on the craft, but even though the disc was just hovering, it wasn't moving around at all, the machinery wouldn't lock in on it. And as the plane got closer to the vessel, the UFO started hopping all over the place, moving faster than should have been physically possible. And this is a common thing we hear about when airplanes encounter UFOs, is that the UFO moves impossibly fast and strong. Just kidding. That was a Twilight reference. So to The Final Theory, it looked more like the ship was actually teleporting than like flying. So finally, after the craft hopped around for a while, it just eventually zipped out of sight. And The Final Theory claimed that when he was looking at this report, there was a bunch of documentation and other physical evidence to prove that this encounter was real. But of course, The Final Theory couldn't share this evidence with the people on the above top secret forum for some reason. And obviously, most of the people on the site assumed The Final Theory was lying. They accused them of telling an over-the-top ridiculous story nobody would ever believe, like, get off this forum, this is for real encounters only. Okay, so the very next day, on February 4th, The Final Theory posts again, and this time, it features video footage that they claimed would prove their account was real. And it was about 1 minute and 15 seconds long. It was grainy footage. It was in black and white. And the clip didn't have any audio. It only had visuals. And the title of the file was FLIR 1. And if you didn't know what the footage was supposed to be, this footage would be very underwhelming. For most of the video's length, it just showed a dot in the middle of the screen. Like, literally, that's it. Now, presumably, the pilot who filmed this footage was trying to figure out what the dot was, because the video switched to different views. It was zooming in and out. It was definitely someone on the other end of this video was curious about what was floating in the sky. And it toggled between showing a white video on a dark screen to showing a dark dot on a white screen. And then right toward the very end, the spot just began darting around. And then eventually it zipped off to the left and disappeared from the frame. So now, when the people on Above Top Secret, the forum, could see the footage for themselves, they still didn't buy it. I mean, if you haven't seen this video for yourself, I can't overstate how grainy and low tech it looked. One user actually wrote a reply to The Final Theory where they wrote, "Sorry, it's a totally uninspiring video of a dot." It also didn't help that people could tell where the video had come from. See, it's not like The Final Theory just downloaded a video from a Navy government computer and then uploaded it straight to the Above Top Secret forum. It was actually hosted online on a different website, specifically a website run by a visual effects company in Germany. So when people find this out, this is obvious, right? There was some video editor who specialized in making VFX and had made a fake UFO clip. They then posted it on the forum just to mess with people, and then the Final Theory grabbed it and posted it on this forum. Now, the good news was that the people in Above Top Secret were too savvy to fall for this. And before long, the Final Theory and their ridiculous posts were forgotten. And eventually, the old grainy video actually got taken down because they were like, this is fake. We're not going to have this on the forum. But then something very strange and unexpected happened. It was actually 10 years later. I'm talking the fall of 2017. A group called the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences had recently been formed. And I know that name is a mouthful. And since then, they have actually renamed themselves To the Stars Incorporated, which is what I'll be calling them for the rest of this episode. So To the Stars had one major purpose, and it was to find proof that aliens existed and to bring it to light. So one of the company's founders was a man named Tom DeLonge. And if you're a Blink-182 fan, you'll actually remember him as one of their lead singers and guitarists. But Tom wasn't only interested in music, he was fascinated by UFOs, and he helped establish To the Stars, specifically because he thought the truth was out there waiting to be discovered. Well, one of their first big disclosures came out on December 16th of that year. And listen, I know if you're listening to this and you are skeptical about aliens and UFOs, you're going to think that this group is nutty, right? But honestly, this group is no different than tornado chasers, ghost hunters, people who dedicate their lives to trying to prove something they believe in. And that is what these people are doing. So it's real work that they're doing, okay? So To the Stars released 3 videos, all from real military airplanes, all of which showed UFO interactions. And I'll talk about the other 2 later, but for now, it's important to note that one clip that they released was the exact same FLIR video that the Final Theory had posted all of those years ago. But To the Stars didn't talk about this video like it was some old visual effects reel. They said this was official footage from a real naval operation. So this is the second people who are coming forward claiming that this footage is real. And all 3 videos were not only legit, officials from the Navy had actually confirmed their authenticity for the group, declassified them, and then cleared them for release. So they went through the proper channels to get this footage. Now, here's where things get really complicated. Right away, as soon as these videos hit the news, naval spokespeople said that actually those videos were not supposed to be public. They didn't deny that the videos were real. In fact, they admitted that To the Stars had requested approval to share the clips online. It's just that the authorities actually hadn't given them the go-ahead yet. So from the look of things, this was all just a big misunderstanding. Now, the Navy is claiming that To the Stars asked for permission to release this footage to the public, and the Navy told them no. Then they reworded their request and agreed to withhold some confidential information associated with the videos, and the Navy wrote back with an ambiguous response that could mean it was okay to post the videos online, but you could also interpret it as a no just as easily. The point is, To the Stars had apparently shared something that they probably were not supposed to. And even though they claimed that these videos were authentic, the Navy wouldn't comment either way on if they were or not. So when the news is like, hey, they're saying they got these videos from you, did they? The Navy's like, yes, they did. And they say, okay, are these videos real? And they're like, no comment. So a little over 2 years went by, and the videos kind of existed in this gray area. Nobody denied that they were legitimate, but nobody with any official power would confirm it either. So the US government finally changes their tune about this in April of 2020. That's when an official with the US government came forward that these 3 clips, including the FLIR video, were legitimate. They claim it had been recorded by a naval plane that tried to chase down an unidentified flying object in mid-November 2004. Now, every detail of this disclosure matched what the final theory had originally said. Exactly. Almost like the final theory had actually been looking at an official record. But even with this announcement, some of the people on Above Top Secret still were not buying it. See, UFO enthusiasts tend to be treated as if they're gullible, stupid, or irrational. The people in this forum were used to being mocked, and it was reasonable for them to wonder if this announcement was just another trick, if maybe the US government was lying when they said the videos were real. It's hard to say why they would do that, but for some true believers, it was natural to feel a little paranoid, and there's actually a big group of people out there that think the US government releases information like this little by little to distract us from other things that are going on. So something bigger is happening and they say, oh yeah, this UFO was real. So everyone focuses on that. And the people on the forum are like, okay, if this is real, why did years ago did we discover that this legitimate video from a real naval operation was actually on a German VFX company's website? So after a bit of investigation, a spokesperson from the company came forward and said they never made a video like the FLIR clip. There was no record of any project like that ever coming through back then. And the spokesperson also explained that parts of their file sharing system just were not secure. And if someone wanted to share a video and they didn't want it to be tracked back to them, it would be fairly easy for them to use that company as a go-between. So almost like in a way to anonymously release a video. The idea being that the final theory might have downloaded the FLIR video, then they could have hacked into the VFX company's system and used it to send the file to the Above Top Secret forum. This would obviously make it harder for people to know the leaker's real identity. And I'm sure if this is real, this person who was working in the Navy did not want the Navy and the government to know that they were releasing government footage without permission. So it does kind of make sense, because if someone does try to trace the video back to the source, they would actually just end up at the German company instead. So maybe this wasn't evidence that the video was fake. Instead, this could potentially be the final theory trying to cover their tracks. Either way, from there, more evidence started coming out that made the clips even more believable. After the Department of Defense verified that they were real, eyewitnesses stepped forward and they told their stories and explained where the FLIR footage came from in the first place. So here's the story. See, it was back in November of 2004, two aircraft carriers, the USS Nimitz and the USS Princeton, were in formation together in the Pacific Ocean. And the crew of both ships included sailors who handled all the work on board, and then naval pilots who specialized in flying the airplanes on board. Now, in mid-November of 2004, they were stationed off the shore of the California-Mexico border. And the crew of both ships were going to head to Iraq soon. But in the meanwhile, they were doing exercises. But during these exercises, they began detecting strange, seemingly impossible things on their radar system. And multiple people have come forward that were on these ships and claimed that this actually happened. According to them, there were unexplained objects in the sky near them. And these objects always appeared in groups. 5 or 10 of them would zip over the ship at a time. They stayed in a tight formation and traveled at incredible speeds. But their flight path made no sense. They would literally dart in random directions at apparently random times, or on occasion, they would just sit and hover over the water. It was so odd that some crew members assumed the radar just had to be malfunctioning. They'd just installed a brand new system, so it might have been buggy. But then people began seeing these objects with their own 2 eyes. So after sunset, they actually glowed in the dark, and nobody had any idea what the crafts were. And by November 14th, the commanders were willing to do just about anything to get a better look at these things. So as soon as the UFOs showed up on radar again that day, they sent 2 planes into the air with the sole purpose of trying to see if they could intercept those mysterious ships. So 2 planes carrying a total of 4 crew members hit the skies, and each one had a pilot and a weapons systems officer who could defend the aircraft if these mysterious objects proved to be dangerous. One of the pilots was a man named Commander David Fravor. Now, Fravor was the commander of a whole squadron, so he was clearly accomplished, he was respected. Maybe that's why he even got chosen for this mission, because he'd be able to keep a cool head no matter what happened. He and his weapons system officer jumped into the plane and then they took off. And the whole flight, they had a recording system running called the Forward-Looking Infrared Camera. For short, this system is called FLIR. FLIR is the camera system that they would use to document things in the sky. And as you know, FLIR is the same as the name of that leaked video clip. So as he cruised through the air, David kept his eyes trained on the blue skies, looking for any sign of those crafts above him. And then he looked down and he noticed that there was something hovering above the water. Its engines were so powerful that they were actually churning the waves around them without even touching them. The thing was probably 40 feet long and it didn't have wings or rotors. David couldn't even tell how the craft was staying in the sky. It was white and oblong shaped. In other words, it kind of looked like a mint, like a Tic Tac. In fact, that's what the strange flying object would actually later come to be called, the Tic Tac. So David flew a little closer to Tic Tac to see if he could get a better look at this unidentified object. But before he could get too close, the object just took off. It zipped out of sight faster than any other aircraft David had ever seen before. Later, when David finally landed back on the ship, he might have been expecting to be greeted like a hero, or at the very least for his crewmates to be as confused as he was. After all, on board the Princeton, a team was watching the entire encounter live on a set of TV screens. So they saw the exact same FLIR recordings that David was seeing, meaning everyone had to realize just how weird this entire incident was. And for his part, David was still riding high on adrenaline after this encounter. He wanted to know what that ship was and whether he'd ever get a chance to fly one for himself. So he might have been hoping that his colleagues would feel just as excited and celebratory as he did. I mean, this was a major discovery. But instead, as soon as David set foot back on the deck, his crewmates began mocking him. They were cracking jokes. They teased him by making references to movies like Men in Black, almost like nobody wanted to admit what had actually just happened. So David wasn't the only person who got made fun of after this encounter. The other pilot of the other plane was a man named Chad Underwood, and he was the one who actually recorded the famous video on his FLIR system, the one that eventually got leaked. But before he got around to filming that mysterious object, he spent a while trying to find it. Chad knew there was something in the sky, something that he was supposed to find, but he had no idea what he was supposed to be looking at until the blip showed up on his screen. And the plane's machinery was very sensitive, so even though the object was still too far away for him to actually see it with his own 2 eyes, he could see it on the FLIR. Now, the Tic Tac darted all over the place, almost like it was teleporting. It was on one side of the screen at 1 second and then in a completely different place the next. Chad knew generally where this thing was supposed to be, so he flew right toward it. And even with the object bouncing around, he did his best to keep the front of his plane pointed at it at all times. He drew closer and closer. But as you know, before he could get there, the object just vanished from the FLIR. From the footage, it looks like it darted to the left faster than the plane or its tracking system could follow. But since Chad still hadn't made visual contact and never actually saw it get away, it's hard to say what happened for sure. And as soon as Chad landed on the ship and climbed out of his cockpit, a friend of his walked up and said, "Hey, did you see something out there too?" And Chad could tell from his tone of voice that the friend was not asking that seriously. He was teasing him. He was being passive aggressive. So Chad actually cursed at his friend. But then, since they were buddies after all, Chad agreed to show him the video he'd recorded. And once the friend saw it, he actually completely changed his tune. He believed that Chad really had witnessed something unexplainable. But it's wild that it took seeing the proof with his own two eyes. He wouldn't just take Chad at his word. I mean, even for the Navy, apparently UFO sightings that are done by your captain just are too taboo. Now, David and Chad didn't land and try to convince anyone that the Tic Tac was an alien spaceship. They weren't spouting tinfoil tales. They didn't come down and go, "This is from another planet." All they said was that they didn't know what they had seen and they were confused, which is a very reasonable thing to say. After all, let's imagine, for the sake of argument, David and Chad saw something that wasn't a flying saucer or anything from outer space. I mean, it still had to be something. That would mean that another country had something, some type of technology that America didn't. I mean, maybe it was sent to spy on these ships. Maybe it was a civilian drone illegally passing through their airspace. Maybe it was a natural phenomenon that hadn't even been discovered yet. The point is, all of those possibilities were worth investigating and exploring, and David and Chad were reliable witnesses. Neither of them had been drinking on duty, neither used drugs, and as near as I can tell, they didn't have a history of lying or exaggerating for attention. And yet, here they both were, the butt of everyone's jokes. Except one group was allegedly taking the sighting very seriously. See, at this point, every naval airplane had a system that recorded all of the FLIR footage and other data from every single flight. Then it backed that information up. It was a standard way to keep a record of each mission. But just a few hours after David and Chad landed, before the day was even over actually, one of their crewmates allegedly got new orders. They were ordered to remove those systems from Chad and David's airplanes and lock them in a safe. That way, nobody would be able to just go in and pull up the footage. Then, a pair of mysterious strangers reportedly flew to the ships in a helicopter. They gathered up all of that data from the flights, collected everything from the safe, and then flew away again. Now, nobody knew who these men were or what agency they were with, but clearly whoever they were working for, it was a group that did not want evidence of those Tic Tacs getting out. And they had to also know that this ship had even seen the Tic Tacs. Now, I want to be clear. Spokespeople for the U.S. government have always denied that they tried to hide or destroy the video of the Tic Tac incident. This is in spite of the fact that the original tapes of the FLIR footage are missing to this day. Nobody knows where they went, but a lot of people associated with the encounter insist there was nothing sinister going on. When a journalist later asked David Fravor if he thought there was a cover-up, he said, "There's just groups of people making stuff up." He thought his encounter with the Tic Tac was strange, definitely. In fact, he believed the craft was, as he called it, not something from the Earth. But he didn't think anyone was working to keep it hidden. He was like, there is no big cover-up going on here. He even thought that the missing tapes had a rational explanation, that someone just recorded over them on accident. And in fairness, if government agents really did confiscate the tapes on the day they were made, it's not clear how the final theory would have then found the footage later, right? So that alone feels like very strong evidence that there was no cover-up. Maybe David was right. The FLIR Tic Tac files stayed on the ship's systems for a few months, long enough to be leaked. Then they got misplaced or they just got taped over completely on accident. Still, there does seem to be a good reason to think the Department of Defense wanted to keep these clips secret. And it is possible that they only confirmed these tapes were real because leakers like The Final Theory and To the Stars forced the government's hands. That's admittedly speculation on my part, but I am basing it on the way the Department of Defense handled the other two videos that they confirmed were real. Remember, there were 3 videos that they came forward and said, yes, these are real. Now, I brought this up earlier. 2 years after the To the Stars Incorporated released 3 unidentified videos, the Secretary of Defense verified them as authentic. One was the FLIR Tic Tac clip, and then the other 2 were called Go Fast and Gimbal. Now, these were recorded in 2014 and 2015. Now, at that time, Lieutenant Ryan Graves was a pilot, and he was in the air over Virginia when his radar screen picked up something odd. There was an object in the air that was making hairpin turns and accelerating at speeds that should have been physically impossible. He didn't see anything when he looked out his window, but his airplane's readings were clear. Something was in the sky with him. In fact, other members of his squadron had similar experiences during different flights around this time. One pilot even had a near miss where he almost collided with the mysterious craft. These encounters were happening again and again. According to Ryan, unidentified craft were constantly showing up beginning in the summer of 2014 up until 9 or so months later in the spring of 2015. And it's not necessarily that the encounters stopped at that point. It's actually instead that Ryan and his team were deployed to the Gulf, where they also kept seeing UFOs. And eventually, To the Stars released a pair of clips to the public, which, according to Ryan, were from that 9-month period before they went to the Gulf. Now, the video known as Go Fast shows a flying object going fast, just like you'd guess from the name. And Gimbal shows a dot that looks a lot like the original Tic Tac, except it tilts and it spins as it flies. Now, gimbals are spinning tools that can help moving objects keep their balance. Some camera tripods use them to hold the lens steady while the camera is moving around. So again, the name is appropriate. It's called gimbal because the spot moves like a gimbal. Now, unfortunately, there just aren't as many witnesses who have been willing to come forward and tell their stories about Go Fast and Gimbal. We don't know exactly who was flying the planes when these videos were recorded, and we don't even know the specific date that these videos were recorded. Like with FLIR, these were leaked by To the Stars. And while the Department of Defense confirmed they were real, they refused to release any new information about them. So whatever other context exists, it has been kept a secret. All we know is that it was from above Virginia with this specific squadron and was happening for 9 months. And these 2 videos are the ones that have been leaked. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why all these witnesses may be staying quiet. Because sure, it is possible there's some kind of cover-up at play, but it's also worth pointing out that some witnesses could get into legal trouble for sharing what they know. And we see this a lot in tinfoil tales, especially if these officers speak up while certain information is still considered confidential. Now, we'll probably never learn the final theory's real identity, for example. But investigators with the Navy probably have tried to find them. You'll remember that they posted the FLIR video on an online forum in 2007. The above top secret community was pretty small and obscure at the time. It took 2 years for the Navy to even learn that a leak had occurred. By that point, it had been about 5 years since the UFO incident. And apparently, between the crew of the ships, there was something like 5,000 people on board at the right time to access and leak that video. So there was just no way to determine who had found and then shared this clip online. So the Navy decided to drop the investigation, but there was an official investigation into it. Still, I'm sure it would be a very different story if the final theory were to ever come forward and reveal their identity to the public, which is why they can't. But there's another potential explanation for why so many witnesses are remaining silent. And maybe the people who had encounters with the Tic Tac, Go Fast, and Gimbal are afraid of the stigma. I mean, they know a lot of people who want to ignore or dismiss stories about unidentified flying objects. And rather than deal with the skepticism, the jokes, the outright hostility, they will just pretend that they didn't see anything. They're gonna keep quiet. I already touched a little on some of the mockery that David and Chad faced after their flight when they said, hey, there was something weird up there. And if you look at the statements that they and other witnesses gave afterward, they're full of quotes like, I'm not one of the little green men crazies that are out there. That's what Chad Underwood said when he gave an interview to The Intelligencer. And when David Fravor spoke to the Washington Post, he talked about how much ribbing and teasing he'd gotten since going public with his story. And he said, there is no mercy in my family and friends. Another eyewitness, Alex Dietrich, spoke about the issues when she had an interview with PBS. She was in one of the two planes that allegedly saw the Tic Tac with David and Chad, and her testimony also matched theirs exactly. She saw a 40-foot long Tic Tac-like craft that flew over the ocean, even though it didn't have wings or engines. Now, during her interview, Alex said she had no idea what the object was, and she didn't really feel comfortable guessing. And then she ended the conversation by saying, thanks for taking this seriously, which really just goes to show how hard it is to get respect when you have witnessed something this mysterious. Like, a lot of people are not going to believe you. I mean, I started off this story by saying there are a lot of people who don't even believe in aliens or UFOs. The most striking quote to my mind actually came from Ryan Graves' statement to Congress. He said this: the stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. It silences commercial pilots who fear professional repercussions. It discourages witnesses and is only compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony. So the people who are most likely gonna run into UFOs also are afraid to talk about it. So in spite of these calls from witnesses who wanted to be taken seriously, a lot of people, even the press, were very quick to dismiss the accounts. And there have been endless attempts to debunk the footage of these three videos. A UFO video analyst named Mick West wrote a guest article for The Guardian, and in it he described all the reasons that he thought the gimbal video in particular wasn't anything special. And in his opinion, it looked like a trick of the light. Mick thought the pilot picked up the exhaust from another plane that was far off in the distance, and because his onboard cameras were mounted on a gimbal, all of the footage they captured moved like a gimbal. According to Mick, the object's swoops and loops weren't because some flying disc was rocking around, but because the camera that was capturing this footage was rocking around. He also tried to explain away the Tic Tac and the Go Fast sightings. Mick thought the Tic Tac was the same kind of thing as the gimbal. It was just an airplane in the distance that showed up oddly on the FLIR camera. And Go Fast, according to him, was a balloon that was not going fast at all. It was just another optical illusion based on the way the planes above it were flying. But those explanations, particularly for the Tic Tac video, ignore all of the eyewitness testimony. David saw a ship with his own eyes. It wasn't just through the FLIR camera. And he said it was not some airplane off in the distance. Not to mention the story Ryan Graves told about how he knew a pilot who almost collided with a UFO. Mick's theories only make sense if you assume all of these people are lying or exaggerating, which comes back to the core issue I've been talking about this entire time. If you will not take any UFO eyewitness testimony seriously, on principle, you need like hard proof, then how can anyone feel safe coming forward with something they saw? I do think it's worth mentioning the Department of Defense hasn't commented on Mick's theories or anyone else's attempts to debunk the videos. If one of those explanations was true, you might expect the government to speak up and say, you're right, it was just a weather balloon or a trick of the light. And instead, to this day, the official stance is still that we don't know what's in those clips, but those clips are authentic. Which means the Tic Tac, Go Fast, and gimbal videos are pretty controversial. which is true of almost every piece of UFO evidence we have. True believers will point to them as proof that we have been visited by aliens from outer space, and skeptics will find a way to write them off. But until we settle the debate once and for all and find hard, undeniable evidence that extraterrestrials exist or don't, all we can do is remain open to any possibility. And that is the history of 3 videos of possible UFO sightings that the government has said are authentic. Basically, that is the story of Tic Tac, Go Fast, and Gimbal. All right, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on aliens, UFOs, the government's involvement in all of that, and eyewitnesses who come forward with their stories. And I will see you next time as we go further into the dark together. Goodbye.